I sat down this afternoon and started thinking, and I started writing down a list of things. So the title of these remarks is 59 Problems with Vietghanistan. And by Vietghanistan, I mean what we're doing, the project, the proposal, the mission, the discussion, the pseudo-debate we're having over the war in Afghanistan. And so I want to give you 59 problems that I can think of off the top of my head, and then ask you if you might want to add to the list. And I guess if you have any good reasons why we should be doing what we're doing, then we have to subtract for those that way. But I'm thinking we can get to 60 or 75 or 100 if you help me out. Number one, the crimes of 9/11 were planned primarily in hotels and apartments in Germany and Spain and flight schools in the United States. We're not bombing every county where there's a flight school where somebody trained for 9/11 because it doesn't make a bit of sense, right? Paul Pillar, who was a former top official in the CIA, has said, as many have said, that were Al-Qaeda to have a base of operations in Afghanistan, it would not make us significantly less safe in this country. That's not some major threat that isn't there now that would be there if that happened. Number two, there are estimated to be about 100 members of Al-Qaeda at the most in Afghanistan. If we're going to have over 100,000 troops there, plus mercenaries, plus support, right, we're talking over 1,000 people to combat each member of Al-Qaeda, plus airplanes, plus missiles, plus all the weapon systems. Who are these superheroes? How does that possibly make any sense? Number three, there is no reason to believe that the Taliban, being in power, would work with Al-Qaeda, would bring in Al-Qaeda and promote Al-Qaeda. It's not in their interest. They're not doing it. This is the position of Mr. Holbrooke, the president's man in Afghanistan. This is not something I'm just making up. Number four, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are actually two different things. They're not the same thing, and in much of the conversation in this country, that's lost. Number five, it's very unlikely the Taliban would gain complete control in Afghanistan if we left. They would not regain it because they never had it. And diplomacy and aid and other techniques can be just as effective in determining the outcome as continuing with the crazy strategy we've got now. Number six, the big phrase of the day is we're going to finish the job. Right? Without any explanation of what the hell the job is. And without any recognition that, judging from the way we are constructing these massive bases, the one thing that is clear is that finishing is not part of the plan. We're not planning to ever finish anything in Afghanistan. Number seven, occupying and bombing this place is making us less safe. It is enraging hostility against us. As with most occupations in most places through most of history, the occupation is the primary driver of the resistance of it, of the hostilities toward our country. Number eight, I think this is hugely significant and maybe obvious, but almost never said. Everything we're doing there is illegal. And we are destroying the rule of law. We've made it impossible for our State Department to tell other nations to obey laws. Because we don't. And it's just outrageous that we have this debate without ever considering the fact that all the options being considered are illegal. Number nine, we are not benefiting the people in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a disaster. The third poorest country on earth, and getting worse, and violence getting worse, and poverty getting worse. There's been no benefit to the people of Afghanistan for the past 8 years and counting. Number 10, we're not benefiting the women of Afghanistan, who do not have more rights now than they had before. In some ways have fewer. Rape is legal in Afghanistan now under our occupation. Number 11, we are using Afghanistan as the base for lawless prisons, as our central headquarters for our lawless prison. We've built new shiny buildings and new shiny rules for how to treat prisoners that throw out all laws and all standards and the right to habeas corpus. And if we shut down Guantanamo, we may take 75 people and put them in a prison in Afghanistan. We're using Afghanistan as the new, although it was older and has always been bigger and has always been worse, the new Guantanamo, the new central base for lawlessly imprisoning people. Number 12, there are things that we should be doing in Afghanistan. It's not a question of do we bomb and shoot people or not. They need aid, they need diplomacy, they need jobs, they need education, they need resources, instead of bombs and troops and mercenaries, which are illegal in many ways. There's a great group called Jobs for Afghans that I recommend going to their website and supporting. Number 13, whenever they talk about things like fixing the Patriot Act and making it even worse and more abusive in Washington, they talk about all the success and how we've destroyed Al-Qaeda by stripping away all of our rights. But whenever they talk about the need to send more troops to a war, they talk about the growing, looming danger of Al-Qaeda. You know, which is it? Number 14, if you do something for 8 years and you still haven't come up with even a vision of what success would look like, what is the 9th year going to necessarily do for you? Number 15, they call this place the graveyard of empires for a reason.
Yes.
Several empires have died here in exactly the same predictable way, and nothing has changed. And we haven't learned a thing, and we are proceeding to destroy our empire in Afghanistan. Number 16, the National Guard, the state militias, the people who signed up to aid their states in this country, have no business being there. This is not constitutional. These people need to be brought home to the states and not be part of foreign illegal occupations. Number 17, when a young man or woman is recruited to join the United States military, they sign up to defend the Constitution and to defend the United States of America. And they are lied to in many, many ways, and they are sent off in an illegal, aggressive operation that has nothing whatsoever to do with defending the United States of America, except that it makes us less safe. Number 18, there is simply nothing worse than war. When you talk about the dangers of ending a war and replacing it with something else, there is nothing worse that you can replace it with. Number 19, we never declared a war. And this vague authorization to use force is simply unconstitutional. And after 8 years of the damn thing, has lost all relevance to whatever the mission may be now. If you're going to have this war, you're going to have to declare it. This is simply not constitutional. And when Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi go and tell the president, you want to escalate it, we got your back, just send us the bill, that is not constitutional. It is not. Number 20, we talk about this war in Afghanistan, but we also talk about the war in the region. And we sort of blur over the fact that to the people in Pakistan, it certainly looks to them like there's a war on Pakistan. We don't think of it as a war because we don't put people of the right kind at risk. We use unmanned drones, we use secret operations by mercenaries, but it looks to them like a war, and it is absolutely illegal under international law and under our Constitution. There is absolutely no excuse for such a thing. And we are behaving as if we can simply expand into neighboring countries and we don't even have to go through the pretense of the vague authorization to use force anymore. We're just beyond that. Number 21, a lot of what we do in the peace movement is object to what the wars do to U.S. servicemen and women. But the fact is that morally speaking, using these unmanned drones is just as bad. Could we maybe request that we turn off phones until we're done? Using unmanned drones to simply bomb people without risking directly American lives is in many ways morally as despicable as risking our own American men and women. 22, I touched on this already, but the Constitution does not let a president decide the things that we are all talking about the president deciding. Those who want him to decide one way and those who want him to decide the other. He has no business having anything to do with it. It's a job for Congress. Number 23, when the military is putting public pressure on the president to escalate a war, then we've lost civilian rule over the military. This is illegal. This is not legal. This is not appealing to the ultimate authority because it's the military. Number 24, I was on a TV program recently where I argued that the American public had turned against this occupation, and a nice progressive think tanker said to me, well, yes, but the American people don't know any better. They don't know anything about Afghanistan. They can't tell you what languages are spoken there. They have no business interfering, right? As if, if you don't know anything about a place, it's okay to bomb it, but it's not okay to refrain from bombing it, right? Then I went to a forum on Capitol Hill in the Senate caucus room, and a gentleman named Brzezinski, who was a security advisor to Carter, gets up and gives a list of important talking points. And number one is, of course we can't leave Afghanistan. Everybody gets that. Let me move on to some possibly controversial things. And so I got up and said, Mr. Brzezinski, roughly half, a little more, of the American public is against it. That's almost the definition of maximum controversiality. How can you say it's not controversial? And he says, yeah, but I'm not talking about the American public. They get fatigued. They aren't up to the task. I'm talking about those of us who know things. And then I'm on this book tour, and I do one of these talks about my book in a philosophy department. And about half the professors object to me advocating for majority rule because they think that we should have a rule by experts, by people who know things. Well, this is a country that strives to expand majority rule. Majority with protection for minority rights, but majority rule, not rule by a class of experts. And to jump ahead, I'll get to it in a minute, but let me go to number 25. Everybody is talking about whether or not to have an escalation. We do this every time after we have an election to end a war. We have a debate over whether to escalate it or not. And the best position is to not escalate it. It's outrageous. I mean, we think this is logical, right? First we'll stop the escalation, and then we'll start scaling back from there. But that's not how things work in Washington. In Washington, you frame a debate with two extremes. So if one extreme is 40,000 troops, and the other extreme is keep it as it is now, then the middle ground is 20,000 troops. If one extreme is 40,000 troops, and the other extreme is get the hell out, then the middle ground is to begin the withdrawal. So you have to say what you really mean, because there's not any coherent, in-depth explanation for keeping it as it is now. That isn't working by anybody's definition. And yet that's the position of all the peace organizations, is keep it as it is now. No. End the whole thing. And of course, don't escalate it. Number 26. What the peace organizations are asking people to do, other than getting that point wrong, is telling people to go to the wrong place with their message. Everybody's got to call the White House. Everybody's got to fax and email the White House. Right? I mean, we used to protest Bush at the White House, but we didn't ask him to do things thinking he might pay attention to us. Right? Presidents have never paid attention to people. It's virtually impossible to influence a president. I mean, I have no objection if you want to do it. And I have no objection to journalists trying to do it. And all the big shots who are considered authoritative in Washington because they've been wrong about everything up until now, telling them to get out of Afghanistan, that's useful. But ordinary people who can only do so many emails and phone calls and faxes and go to things have got to be focusing on their member of the House of Representatives, where they have a chance, and telling them to stop paying for the war, which is what we did when it was Bush's war and a bad war, When it's Obama's war and a good war, we still have to go to our congressmen. And if you do that, if you explain to people that these wars belong to Congress, then the people who don't want to get out and protest their friend, the president, the people who think it's not wise to protest a popular president, will get out and protest with you, because it's Congress's war. And if you take the protest to your representative, you just might be able to influence them. Number 27. When we start talking about the experts in Washington and who's to be listened to, and it's wonderful, it's dramatic, how many supposed experts have turned against this thing so rapidly. Why is it always the military experts? Why must the president meet with the War Council and there's no Peace Council? Why on television are all the experts on whether to have war or peace members of a war organization? Why are there never any peace experts? Right? Why is everybody who got anything right in the past 8 years excluded from being considered an expert? We only have half the experts. Number 28, we only have 5% of the people on this planet. Might there not be some non-U.S. experts on anything ever? The other 95% of our species. And if you're going to tell me that the American people can't have any say in what's done with the American people's government because we don't know everything about Afghanistan, when do the people of Afghanistan get to be considered experts? Because the people of Afghanistan don't approve of our occupation of their country. Number 29, let's start looking at some of these experts. A man named Howard Hart was at my alma mater, University of Virginia, recently. 25 years in the CIA, used to be in charge in Afghanistan. Says, get the hell out. Go to Rethink Afghanistan. They've got videos on that website. They've got at least a few former CIA experts saying, you gotta get out. Number 30, if that's too dated for you, what about the current ambassador to Afghanistan from the United States, who says, don't escalate this thing, it's crazy, against the will of his boss, the Secretary of State, against the will of the President, speaks out and says, get out. And this is a guy who was the general in charge of the military operation in Afghanistan for a good chunk of the current occupation. General Carl Eichenberg. He agrees with groups like Jobs for Afghans. He thinks we should be investing in agriculture and useful nonviolent alternatives so that all the people signing up to fight so that they can eat that night have a choice. Number 31, look at somebody like David Rode, who was a New York Times reporter held hostage for 7 months in Afghanistan. He's released and he writes about what motivates the people who held him hostage. And it wasn't our freedoms. It was what we do to the rest of the world. It was illegal occupations. It was seizing people lawlessly and holding them prisoner with no charge and then letting them go later. It was torture. These were the motivations. Number 32, another top diplomat in charge of a region in Afghanistan, Matthew Ho, doesn't just speak out, he quits. He resigns. He says, I will not support this. It's counterproductive. Get out now. A good friend of mine whose books I think I saw on a table over there, Colonel Ann Wright, was smart about this 5 years ahead of time and quit over Iraq. But she was there and helped open the embassy in Afghanistan. And she says, get out. These voices who've been right for years don't have to be excluded. Number 34, the United Nations is pulling its staff out. NATO allies are scheduling the end of their involvement. And what in the hell is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization doing in Asia? Anywhere. You know, where they just have finally come up with the idea that their staff in charge of bombing Central Asia shouldn't be drunk at the time. You know. Number 35. What about the National Security Advisor who gives national security advice to the President? James Jones. Is his advice worthless? He says you put these people in, they'll just be swallowed up. These are his words. Number 36. What about Vice President Biden, who has never seen a war he didn't like and doesn't like this one? What about people with some experience occupying Afghanistan? The guy named Mikhail Gorbachev says, get out. Are you insane? We tried this. Number 38. If the military has to be the top experts here, do only the generals count, or do members of the military count? Because a growing body of veterans and of active duty troops refusing to comply with illegal orders are saying we know better. Aren't they part of the authority of the military? Number 39. One of the major reasons that we have such a crisis with post-traumatic stress disorder is almost certainly that these people have no idea what the hell they're doing in Afghanistan and how it has anything to do with defending this country. Number 40. Whether Americans are all ignorant and irrelevant or not, it's our money, it's our grandchildren's money that's going to pay back China for this. Ultimately, we ought to have some say over what's done with that money. Number 41. People who were right forever. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who voted the right way, alone, and needed security protection.
Yeah.
The people who I put on AfterDowningStreet.org and people put on other media outlets and websites, Norman Solomon, Ray McGovern, Tom Hayden, Gareth Porter, why do all these voices have to be excluded? Number 42. Most of what we're doing is destroying laws, targeting civilians, using depleted uranium, locking people up without charge, torturing people. To this day, the United Nations has warned us about the crime of our use of drones, and we just ignore them. Number 43, you look at people who've actually been legitimately elected locally in Afghanistan. You look at the bravest members of the parliament. You look at Malalai Joya, a woman who is bravely speaking out And they will say everything I've said and more. Number 44, the president of Afghanistan has not been elected. We have imposed U.S.-style democracy on Afghanistan. We have unelected presidents. Our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, has declared that their government is so hopelessly corrupt. Our puppet government in Afghanistan is so hopelessly corrupt that we may have to cut off all assistance, all aid, that is to say, all non-violent, non-military aid. But the most corrupt government in the world is okay to invest trillions of dollars in military efforts to prop up and defend. These are our priorities and our sense of possibilities. Number 45, you look at the wisest, most informed historians, students of occupations and insurgencies, people like William Polk, and they've been saying for a long time, get out. Number 46, what about reverse experts? What about people who have been wrong and dishonest about everything? I mean, should you not think 3 times before agreeing with Dick Cheney on anything? Number 47, we have to completely drop this idea of experts at all and live up to majority rule. We will be far better off. Even if we don't have a good communication system yet, even if the public can be wrong sometimes, it's not wrong nearly as much as these people. Number 48, the people who make the decisions are not on the battlefields. Almost nobody in their families are on the battlefields. We don't have a standard that I think we should have, that presidents and members of Congress who vote for wars should send their military-age family members to participate. Not because I want them to, but because then we wouldn't have these wars. Instead, we have this class of people that's almost not involved. Number 49, those who do fight have been lied to, and they've been drafted by a poverty draft, and we call them volunteers. But if you are a volunteer, you can unvolunteer. If you are in a volunteer military, you can choose whether to participate in a war or not. If we had voluntary state militias and not this permanent Imperial army, then we couldn't fight illegal wars because the volunteers would not cooperate. It's not volunteer. Number 50, if Khalid Sheikh Mohammed deserves a real justice system outside of military justice, which has of course been compared to military music.
Yes.
Don't members of the military deserve that too, including troops who refuse illegal orders? Do we have to continue with that justice system? And are we going to degrade our civilian justice system in the process of trying to restrict the rights of people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed? Number 51, we never talk about the trade-offs. We talk about, is it smart to do this military strategy or that one? Never mind that we're talking about trillions of dollars, and we never talk about the trade-offs that we're losing. Number 52, we also never talk in the corporate media about what might be the real motivations. We simply have stenographers who take down the explanations of why we're going to escalate, why we have to continue. After centuries of being lied to about wars, we don't have reporters who question, who speculate, who look at their demands to have pipelines, who look at the money they've taken from weapons makers, who look at the bases that are being built and what those bases might be used for in going into other countries, who look at what the think tanks have been pushing openly for decades about what we need to do in the Middle East. Nothing of it. Simple stenography. 53, I want to talk about this one a little bit. Congress is beginning to push back a little bit, or at least look like it's pushing back a little bit. Congressman McGovern has a bill that says we need an exit plan. We need the Secretary of War to give us an exit plan. Now, if you could imagine that passing the House and fantasize about it passing the Senate and dream about the president signing it even though he doesn't want to and refraining from signing, statementing it, and so forth, the Secretary of War, or as we call him, the Secretary of Defense, could give a plan that says we'll be out in at least the next 86 years and we'll relocate to Thailand. I mean, it could be anything. That's it. I mean, the point of this bill saying we want an exit plan is to send a message. It's a talking point. It's a good one. It says we should have an exit plan. It's not doing something. It's not really going to enforce anything. Congresswoman Barbara Lee has a bill that says no money for the escalation. That starts to sound like something better. It sounds like it's real. But imagine if you could pass it through the House of Representatives, if you could get a majority to say, we don't want to fund an escalation in Afghanistan. Well, that means that you could have gotten a majority to vote no on the bill that would have funded the escalation in Afghanistan. Instead, you passed a bill with a talking point, and now you have to pass it through the Senate. And you have to get the president to sign it. Right? Congressman David Obey, military mom who's a friend of mine named Tina Richards, her son had been in Iraq twice and was going for the third time and had been attempting suicide. And Tina Richards ran into David Obey, spelled just like Obey, appropriately enough, in a hallway in Congress 2 years ago. And he screamed at her and called her an idiot liberal for suggesting that if you claim as a congressman to oppose a war, you shouldn't keep funding it. You shouldn't be the congressman who chairs the committee who writes the bills to fund the wars, as David Obey is. He screams at her, you know, if once a war is started, you must continue it infinitely, or you're committing treason. Just like all the Republicans said up until this past June when they all committed treason and voted against a war bill. This was David Obey's position, right? Well, last month, a lot of us went to the White House. I wanted to go to the House. Everyone else wanted to go to the White House. So we went to the White House, and we said, you know, maybe not a ninth year, maybe eight's enough. You know, we had all these doctors with us because there was a press event in the White House with all the doctors who wanted to reform healthcare without reforming, you know, healthcare. And all the doctors who weren't allowed in were out there with us saying, end the war, the majority's against it, give us single-payer health care, the majority wants it, take the leftover trillions and, you know, maybe a free college, do something good with it. What's the problem? And the problem turned out to be there were more than 25 of us, so they put us all in jail. And the next day, the leaders of the two branches of government, the Republican and the Democratic parties, go to the president and say, according to Senator Reid, you want to escalate, you don't want to escalate, don't escalate, we got your back. But David Obey, who's in that meeting, puts out a statement in which he pretty much joins the idiot liberals, which he says, support the troops to him now means we actually got to pay attention to whether we spend money on risking people's lives to go kill and die for a pointless, hopeless, disastrous war, suggesting rather strongly that he might consider not only admitting that he's responsible for funding this thing, but that he might oppose at least the money to escalate it. That has to be encouraged. This week, he did something else that up until this week, only an idiot liberal or people who write books like that one would have ever mentioned. And that is he and Congressman Murtha and others put in a bill that said we're going to have a war tax. We're going to have these wars, we're going to have a tax to pay for them. Wonderful, wonderful idea. Sends a perfect message. But they are quite open about the fact that they're not going to try to pass it, that they're not dreaming about the Senate passing it, that they don't imagine the president would sign it against his own will, and so forth. So all of these things send a message. But there's also such a thing as doing, not just talking. Right? Some of us have had enough of talking. You know, Congressman Alan Grayson sent me an email recently that said, Dick Cheney's still on the loose. Dick Cheney's not behind bars. Let's hold him accountable, send me money. And you think people don't want to hold Dick Cheney accountable? This guy got over $500,000 in a day, Congressman Grayson. And do you know what he wanted to do to Dick Cheney?
Send him a message.
Send him a message. He wanted to go on television and call Dick Cheney a vampire, which does not have any teeth to it. And Congressman Grayson is far better than most Congress members. He does do things. Sometimes he's pushing a bill that would let Congress see what happens with our money in the Federal Reserve. Congress is supposed to control it. This would just let him see. But mostly he talks better, and mostly the better members talk better than the worst members. John Conyers last July, Nancy let him hold a pseudo-impeachment hearing where he said, we're not going to impeach anybody, but we'll hear all the impeachable offenses. And he opens it by bragging about the dozens of hearings he's held for the past 2.5 years or so, in which either they've exposed felonies and grave abuses of power and then gone home and had dinner, or the star witnesses have refused to comply with subpoenas, which, by the way, nobody's reissued, nobody's complied with all of those dozens of subpoenas from the past 2 years. And this year, not a single person has been subpoenaed. So to John Conyers, talk is an end in itself. So he brags about the talking. Well, if Congress members want to do something about ending a war, they build a list of Congress members in the House of Representatives who will vote no on bills that fund wars. Then the Senate and the President can do whatever they want, but they can't fight wars. That's doing something. That's the most effective way. All of the other stuff is good. It's not bad. But it's not the first demand you make. It's a compromise. And you don't pre-compromise and leave out the most strategic approach. I spoke with someone actually half an hour ago who may be a Congress member in 1.5 years, 2 years, who said they would vote against any bill that funded these wars, no matter what else was put in there. And her name was Christina Avalos. And I would recommend voting for her. Number 54, we talk about Afghanistan as if we've solved Iraq, as if Iraq is over and done with, right? As if, we had a president who was going to end the occupation of Iraq, so the occupation of Iraq is now ended, and we got to deal with this problem that he was going to escalate in Afghanistan. He said he was going to pull 1 or 2 brigades out a month for 16 months. Here, we've seen 10 months of nothing, right? This president opposed the unconstitutional treaty for 3 years of war in Iraq, now uses it to justify the occupation of Iraq, except that they're quite openly going to violate it and not end the occupation. And the parliament in Iraq approved this so-called treaty on condition that the people of Iraq get to vote it up or down by last July. And they didn't. And now they may not get to vote on it in January. They may not have elections in January at all. And that may be used as an excuse to extend the occupation and to write a new treaty. And none of the people who said hooray a treaty ever went and spoke with a single Native American about treaties. Yeah. Because if you don't write it and you just take it, they're going to write another one to replace it. Number 55. We talk about these wars as if the biggest thing at stake here is just the immediate wars and not where we leave the power to make wars for the coming years and decades. And that is the biggest thing. And when we go along with the pretense that war decisions are up to the president, even if we're telling him to do the right thing, we're reinforcing the most dangerous thing in play here. Everything we do has to be built around the need to take the war powers away from the commander-in-chief, just as the people who wrote the Constitution thought they had done. Number 56. These wars are what have been used to strip away all of our rights and take the powers to make laws and to make treaties and to make appointments and to make secret operations and to spend secret money and to misspend money and to imprison without charge and to torture and to rendition and to be above the rule of law, to put all of that in the White House. The war power is not just one power, it's the power used to take all the other powers. Number 57. We now are told the president's going to decide everything, probably on the 1st of December. And then it's going to be too late. Then we'll have done everything we possibly could have done. We will have phoned and emailed the White House. And then it will be too late. Bullshit. It's not over. It's not over until we say it's over. And that's if it takes us another week, and that's if it takes us 85 more years, and the people who win are not in this room. It's not over until we win. Number 58. There's nothing in the discussions in the corporate media and elsewhere about a role for us, about a role for citizens, about what we do in this picture. That has got to be changed. And number 59, all of the other stories that we talk about the University of California's budget, about the economy, about the environment, we leave out the wars as if they're somehow separate, as if that's not where all the money's going there in Wall Street, as if these are different, separable issues. That has to change.